Listen to this episode if you want the inside scoop of how you build, manage, maintain, and nurture your dream team. I know hiring is such a major problem in product-based businesses. It seems like something that is absolutely foreign when you didn't start business as a leader. Today, we are met with Victor Mays. He is an award-winning creative director and a writer who has spent the past 2 decades leading teams at the world's largest publishers. He wrote a book called Lead Like an Editor, where he talks about how if you actually lead your teams like an editor of a publication, your teams will be more effective. We dove into how to build a great team, how to hire well, how to give good feedback, and how do you know if this actually is a good fit within your vision and your mission and your culture for your business. Without further ado, this conversation was great. Let's dive in to Victor Mays. Victor, can you explain to us what you mean when you say lead like an editor? And why is it really different and better than the way that modern people lead?
So I spent most of my career working as an art director and creative director at publications, really around the country, magazines. And there was a 3-year period where I stepped away and started my own business to sort of scratch an entrepreneurial itch. And I thought there was going to be this really big learning curve, but what I sort of really discovered quickly was that there were all of these skills that I had from being a journalist and from being an editor that really sort of helped me navigate. For one, I knew that if I didn't know something, it was okay to reach out and seek help. That's what reporters do. You put on your reporter's hat, you call someone when you need the answer. I also knew that I was never going to get anything done if I didn't set deadlines for myself and learn how to meet them. You know, it's easy when you're a first-time entrepreneur to let things go on in the ideation phase for a long time without actually having like strict deadlines. And then I would say the other thing too was that I knew how to talk to my audience. I knew who my customer was and how to speak to them in a voice that resonates with them. So I think these are all things that editors do every day that are very natural to us, but that when you take an entrepreneur and sort of put this lens over it, it really, I think, helps you figure out how to hone your messaging and also how to arrange your day and organize yourself.
Totally. And I have people that have started off in all sorts of different careers. And I find that when people do work in other elements, like in magazine or media or PR or communications in any degree, there is a lot of overlap versus I have a lot of nurses or a lot of teachers. Like it's just not as much of a business mindset because it's just a totally different path that they're going. You talk a lot about a major thing you need is vision. You need a vision. You need to know what you're chasing. Can you explain what that really means and how somebody really finds that in those early stages?
Yeah. So, I think a lot of people confuse vision and mission, and your vision statement is where you see the company or the business going. And the mission statement then is how you get there. But for the vision, I think I don't want to say pie in the sky, but I do think it's something that you can visualize that's not, well, we are going to be a company that does X, Y, Z and goes into every single detail. Simon Sinek, who has written a bunch of books, including Start With Why, he always gives the example of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech and says, this is an example of something that is a vision of, I can see little children of different races holding hands together. It's not a 6-point plan for, how to get from A to Z, but you've got to start with what you really see and the vision that, you see for the future of your business before you can figure out the nuts and bolts of how to get there.
Yeah, you're so right. And I see it all the time where people are just kind of building, but they don't really know, even in 3 to 5 years, where they want to be. They're just like, oh, I just want to be a bigger business. And it kind of comes down to the point of, if you don't have a goal, how can you really actually create the plan and hold the deadlines? And that's where it kind of gets of, okay, you're a full-time business owner or a part-time business owner, and you have this time, but like, what should you really do with your time? How do you prioritize it if you don't have a vision?
Exactly. And sometimes the vision can look different for you and your business than for what maybe society has told you that vision should look like. There are some people who are solopreneurs or who have one employee, or it's them and their spouse who run the business, and they are really happy with that. And they, maybe offload their accounting or hire for certain things, but they don't want to grow a huge company. And that's fine too.
Yeah, that's a great point because, not everybody wants 500 employees or even 50 employees eventually. And sometimes people do and they build it and they're like, shoot, this was not what I wanted to do either. That it's a totally different ball game than if you are just like, no, we want a small team, keep it like lean and tight. And it kind of allows for a totally different culture within the business.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's another thing you talk a lot about is the culture when it comes to hiring, maintaining, leading in general. How do you really feel like you do choose a culture if you've never started something before?
So I think there's a little bit of like a leadership learning gap in terms of we often become leaders because we want to start a business, or if you work for a corporation, you often become a leader because you've progressed up the ladder and have just sort of landed in this spot because a promotion put you there. I don't think people really think about leadership enough, maybe. And so for me, in terms of figuring out culture, it's figuring out what you want based a lot of times on your experiences. And, in the past, did you have a good boss? Did you have a bad boss? What about your good bosses was great? What about the places that you loved to work was great? And what about maybe some other places wasn't? And I think it's really sort of looking at all of that and really sitting down and thinking about it. And then also seeing what your employees want. Everyone says, oh, they want more money. And sure, that could be the case. But also there are other ways to create culture without necessarily giving everyone a giant raise,
Yeah.
One of the things I talk about with magazines, if anyone's seen The Devil Wears Prada,
Oh, I'm so excited about the new movie coming out. I haven't been this excited in a long time about a movie.
Oh, for sure. All of the people in the magazine industry are buzzing about it. But, one of the things that keeps Anne Hathaway's character sort of in her crappy job or her job with her difficult boss is all of a sudden she's like riding in town cars and she's getting free clothes. And that's an extreme example. And it does exist in the magazine world. But I think there's a way to think about perks and little benefits that you can have in terms of, is it a work from home day? Is it letting people, go to a conference every year that maybe is of a personal interest to them? There's all sorts of different ways that you can build a culture that makes people want to come to work and really feel like they're doing something that isn't just collecting a paycheck, that they have a little bit of a community at work as well.
100%. And I mean, I talk to friends all the time. They're like, they could pay me double and they could make me go back into office and I wouldn't want to do that. Or, they would take this away and I wouldn't take the job. Or like, I literally love this position because of these certain things that aren't often actually monetary, especially now where work-life balance is so prioritized. And there's a lot of like, different people. And it's the same thing with vision. Like some people don't want to work 80 hours a week and some people are totally fine for it, where you kind of have to establish the culture. Like you see people out there that are like, hey, if you want work-life balance, we're not for you. And then there's also people that are like, hey, we do 4-day work weeks and you get a 3-day weekend every week and you get 2 weeks off. And people are almost marketing their job positions based on the culture within their business too.
Absolutely. So I think it's figuring out what works for your business. And then if you have some leeway, then kind of in some cases, if you want to keep your current employees happy, what do they want? And we always look back at the Googles and Facebooks that had all these ping pong tables and video games. And it's like, well, now people would probably rather work from home than come in and use those services. So maybe a couple of days of at home work or, work from home would be better than spending all this money on, sort of lavish offices.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I have plenty of friends that work in other places and nobody talks about the ping pong tables that they have and being able to do that. They're talking about how they feel and how incentivized they are and, their community, the people that they work with, like those are certain things. And yes, it sounds really nice to have slides and like ball pits in your HQ, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's what's keeping people around.
I think also having values as a company that people can connect with. So one of the things that I talk about in my book is that, it should be no secret, but journalism, except for the very top editors, has never been a path to riches. But a lot of people have stayed with it because if they're news reporters, maybe they feel like they're doing a good for society. Or even, in my case, I have worked at interior design magazines mostly, and there are people there who love interior design. There's also things like Runner's World and Bicycling Magazine. These are magazines where people have a real strong connection with what the topic is. So I think it's also figuring out a way, whether that's intrinsic to your business or maybe, signing up for a volunteer thing once a month that everyone can go do together, figuring out a way to make the business feel like the employees are giving back or getting something back in return.
Yeah, that's really great. I mean, it all goes back to the vision, the culture. What are you trying to build? And I think even talking about audience, like you talk about audience from a customer perspective, but there is a lot of audience around your actual people you're trying to hire. What do they care about and what really will keep them around? It's really important. And oftentimes I'll have people come to me and they'll be like, hey, we have this team. I just feel like they're like kind of lackluster, like they're not super motivated. And you ask like, well, when was the last time you asked them, what are they excited about? What are their strengths? What do they really even want to do? And it's like, well, never. And it's actually just thinking of your people as people a lot of times is how can you kind of get into that nitty gritty of it?
For sure. And one of the things that I say too is that as entrepreneurs or business leaders, we're all super motivated and a lot of times really ambitious. And you have to remember that hopefully your best employees are like that too. If you have a new position open or new initiatives that you're going to hire for, well, always consider the current pool of talent for bigger things. I think that's one thing that I've seen as people who've worked at companies for years and are continually passed over or, someone else is brought in. But sometimes I think certain companies think that bringing in fresh blood is like the magic bullet. But there is something to rewarding people who've worked really hard and who've shown an interest in growing their careers with you as well.
Totally. And it's going to make people want to work harder because they're seeing other people that are getting rewarded for it and moving up and being able to do that. It's also going to make people be more passionate about what you're building because they know that there's vertical momentum in what you're building as well. Something that I hear a lot is people started a business because they were creative. They started a business because they just had a good idea. And now all of a sudden they have like even a team of 10 and they're not a trained leader. They didn't really want to be a leader, but shoot, now I have to hire and I have all these things. What do you really feel like it takes to become like that first step in leadership? How do people go from, hey, I was a solopreneur just grinding to now I have a team of even 5 to 10 people? What's the first step and some mistakes that people make in that to try to build a better team?
Well, kind of what I talked about earlier, I think the first step is realizing that chances are you were never taught about leadership in school and that it is sort of your job, I think, as a leader to educate yourself about what makes a good leader. So, when I got my first real management role, I went from being an art director, which is a very creative position, to all of a sudden leading a team of art directors at a pretty big magazine at the time. And I went out and bought books about leadership and started reading them, started listening to podcasts. And so I think like that's step one is like realize that being a leader and running a company are two different things. Like there is something intrinsic about being a leader that you need to sort of embody. And I think, as I said before too, looking at what people in the past have done that you've liked or haven't liked and really sort of thinking about it. And thinking about, well, what do I want to do and how can I lead from my own personality? Just because, there's someone maybe who you see in the business world who's like a hard ass or someone who like leads with really being like forceful. That doesn't mean that you have to do that. I kind of learned that very early on that I'm sort of a laid back person and I'm a hard worker and I want to get the job done, but I also want to laugh and joke. And I think you have to really lean into your own personality as well and sort of put your own stamp on the leadership process.
Yeah. I think it's easy to also start with what you don't want. Is you've heard so many people complain about the boss or, a coworker or how things are going. I think it's a lot harder to be like, this is the culture we're going to create and this is how it's going to be, is you can almost start with, what do I not want? I don't want to be harsh. I don't want to be critical. I don't want to be that micromanager. I don't want people to have to work 100 hours a week or whatever. You can kind of start with that list of no's and it gets you closer to the list of yeses.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that. And then, it just comes back to treating people largely the way that you want to be treated. And I think another thing too is, there may be times where you do have to get feedback. And again, one of the things that I think editors and journalists are great at is that when you turn in a story, it doesn't print that way. An editor makes notes on it. A copy editor makes notes on it. The editor-in-chief makes notes on it. So from the time we start our first job, it is continually built into journalists' really day-to-day process. And they are going to get constant feedback, sometimes harsh, sometimes they don't have time to hold your hand. We got to do it this way and we got to do it fast. And so I think thinking about feedback and how it can help people, if you look at it as, and explain to your direct reports too, coaches and players are on the same team. And I'm the coach, you're the player in this case. I'm giving you feedback not to scold you, but because I want you to do better as a teammate. I want our team to do better. And I think when you come at it from that way, it really helps people understand that they are part of something bigger and their incremental improvement in their performance or the feedback that you give them is really to make them better and not just to scold them, you know?
Totally. Something that we talk about is telling people to almost remove the emotion from feedback. Is yes, of course, it has to be delivered in a way that's not hypercritical for this to be okay. But that oftentimes feedback, it isn't a personal attack. It's just redirecting it to what is going to perform better, make them better at their job. And I hear a lot where, again, I talk to a lot of people that are like, oh, my team like this and I just feel like every time I hire, it's just not who I want. And a lot of times my first question is like, well, how much feedback are you giving them? When you were onboarding them, what was that process like? Because we create our team. We are the ones that are developing these people into the little embryo teammates that we have into a real, like really positive person. There's this idea that when we hire somebody, it's immediately going to be easier, but it oftentimes is a front-loaded process before you can actually remove the stress off of either you or another teammate.
Yeah, and I think being clear about your expectations when you hire someone, even if they have had a job that sounds similar on paper at another company, which, you know, hopefully their experience does match up. But even if that's the case, every company is different. Every boss is different in what they want or expect or what they place a priority on. So I think sort of at the very beginning, sitting down and being really clear. I always use, you know, the analogy of like you dive into a river when you start a new job and like everyone else is already swimming and you've got to like really quickly learn like how to deal with the current. But if someone takes you aside and explains like, okay, well, this river's like this, and you're going to have some trouble in these particular areas, all of a sudden, like now you are a little bit more educated. And so as you start to swim, you know what to look out for, you know the trouble spots, you know what's important, so that you'll acclimate, I think, a lot quicker.
Yeah, 100%. And it is those first 2 weeks that are going to make or break your hire a lot of times, is because you can do this robust hiring process. But then if you rush the onboarding and rush them getting situated into your team, then they're going to still be flailing while everybody else is swimming. And that is a really important step. I would love to talk about the hiring and then a little bit about the like onboarding and then a little bit about the like maintaining, which I think we've kind of touched on. When we talk about the hiring piece, hiring is one of those, you all of a sudden have a pool of people in front of you and you can hire for skills that are written on a resume. You can hire for personality fit. You can hire for almost like passion, a cultural fit. How do you really feel like people should balance all of those pieces?
You know, it is tough and it's part art, part science, of course. Well, first of all, I think you have to sit down and figure out what it is you need. I do think, and I've been guilty of this too, we tend to want to hire people who are a lot like us because then all of a sudden we have a lot to talk about and we are on the same wavelength. And I feel like I've heard you talk about this in some of your other podcasts too. But maybe you don't need to hire for that. Maybe you're the creative person and it really gives you a lot of energy to do the creative work. So don't hire a creative person. Hire a business person, hire a strategist, hire, you know, someone who's a numbers person. So I think that's really key. And there's also instances where that informs the personality. You know, you may need someone who's really great at data and can crunch numbers. And then you start hiring and there's someone who really seems like they're great for it, but they're a little bit quieter and maybe more introverted. And you know what? That could be fine. You don't necessarily need someone to go out into the field and sell the product and talk to customers every day.
Yeah.
So I think that personality can play a little bit into it as well. But I do say, you know, sort of the golden rule in magazine world is that you give them an edit test. So that is a test Obviously, an editorial, it's a test that has them write a story, has them write headlines, has them pitch ideas, all the things that they might be doing in their job. It sort of weeds out the people who can like talk a really good game or maybe have that on their resume versus the people who can actually produce it. The other thing I recommend is to meet with them a few different times. And if you have other people already on your team that you trust, I would have them meet as well. Because there have been times that I've met with someone who was like super bubbly with me and then is like yawning and sort of like low energy on the phone with someone that I consider a really important part of my team. And so I think it's getting other people's perspectives. Ideally, whether you work from home or you are an in-person office, it is, I think, nice to meet with in person at least once if you can. And then really it's at that point, you just sort of have to go with your gut, I think, and, you know, do your due diligence in terms of checking out, like, do I know any friends in common? Is there something of theirs in terms of portfolio pieces or other work that I can go sort of investigate? Obviously do a Google search, but at the end of the day, you know, you kind of got to go with your gut and see what happens.
Yeah, well, and I think it really is, like you said, an art and a science. I talk about the balance of art and science and business all the time. You don't need a bubbly IT director, but you don't want like an introverted, quiet, shy social media marketing person. You almost have to look at the role, what is necessary for them, what you really need out of them. And I have done a lot of hiring in positions in the past, and we would always balance tangible questions with a total off the wall. We always would ask, if we were to host a staff dinner and you had to make dinner, what would your dinner be? To almost see like how they think on their feet. And we would have people be like, oh, I don't know. I'm like, okay, can we let you think about it? Throw something out there. Tacos.
I would say what I make best is reservations. So
that's a good one. See, but it shows personality. It shows you can think on your feet. You can answer questions quickly, you know, and you're willing to like put a little bit of forethought into it. Cause there are some people that are just very well interviewed, that they know what to say. What are your greatest strengths? What are your biggest weaknesses? Do you have any questions that you feel like are good that kind of get people, or I guess your test is a really big one as well, is, hey, can you do this? And let's look at it that way too.
Yeah, I think the test is good. And then this is an important piece too. For your top 2 or 3, especially if you're on the fence, have them walk you through the test, because that does 2 things. One, it shows their thought processes and shows that they did the test and maybe didn't ask a friend to help or what have you. And then the other thing is it allows you to give them feedback and kind of see how they take it. And if they're immediately defensive, or if they're like, oh, that's a great point, or oh yeah, like that's 2 different, you know, rows of data that you can use as you're sort of making the decision. And I think just as much information as you can collect, whether that's conversations, a test, et cetera, I think that's all that information adds up to a decision in the end.
Yeah. I've had candidates to come into their business and they looked great on paper. They hired very well. But then once they were in, they kind of just realized they just either weren't a great fit, but there's almost like this sunk cost bias of like, okay, they're in and like we spent all the time trying to get them in. What's your take on that? Like, I know there's all sorts of sayings. You talk about it in your book of like hire slowly, fire fast, whatever. What's your take on that?
I have had a similar situation happen where I hired someone who I thought was a perfect fit and they ended up not being. They were very talented, but in this case, I think this was back in the like 5-day a week, 10-hour days, work from office. I think they were a little bit more of a free spirit. And I think you give them feedback, you give them chances, you give them some grace, you think about if it's really like the right job for them, or maybe if they're doing a great job, but then there's aspects of the culture that's not fitting. Okay, maybe there's some workarounds. But at the end of the day, if it's just not going to work, I think the longer it goes on, it's sort of the worse. And I don't think you necessarily have to fire quickly, but I do think it brings down the rest of the team if there is a weak link who is not really doing the work or not getting the job done. And then everyone else is sort of having to overcompensate for them.
Yeah. And it also shows a standard. It shows that, okay, this person isn't performing, but, you know, nothing's happening or nobody's saying anything. They keep on getting more ideas, more things that they can do. so I can do that too, right? And I have a lot of people that are like, I can tell almost immediately when they talk about a team member that like it's probably a bad egg, that it's time to go. It's been months and months of them like trying to make it work. Do you feel like there's any major red flags that are like hey, if this is happening, you talk about like a dream team that just isn't a fit?
For me, I think it is a case of largely attitude and work ethic. If someone's not getting something right, but is willing to try or put in the time to learn it, that can sometimes mean extra time outside of work, time on the weekends. There's been things that I haven't known how to do, and I will devote extra time, take a class, whatever. If they're really working hard to try to figure that out and have a really good attitude about it, then I'm like a little bit more willing to make some accommodations or give them a little bit more time at least to see if it could possibly be a fit.
If you see that initiative there.
Yeah, whereas if it's like attitude or they don't take feedback well or they think that they know it all from day one, all of that stuff, those are the things that to me start to look like red flags. And so, a lot of times in that case, it's something that even if they can learn it, they may still never have like the right attitude to sort of fit in with your team or your company culture.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's so many people out there. And again, I think there's like this sunk cost bias that, we've trained them and they're here and like, it's fine. But if you really look in the world, there are so many people out there that would love that position and could really be a perfect fit, skill set wise, culture wise, personality wise, that you don't need to keep somebody that isn't. If it's okay, I'm going to interrupt this podcast for 30 quick seconds to let you know about the Founders Cafe. It is my completely free podcast community where you can gain access to bonus resources, gain access to me and free coaching calls, as well as build a network of other business owners just like yourself. Business ownership is a lonely game, and we might as well build community, build a network, and have a space to collaborate. We can bring this conversation and all the other conversations we have on this podcast over into this free podcast community and make this a two-way street. I would love to answer your questions there, connect with you, see you on our next free coaching call. Click the link in the show notes and you'll find the link there. We've talked a lot about kind of like the negative side of having a team, but a team is actually really wonderful. When you have a perfect fit, the sigh of relief you have is insane, and it really is great. How do you feel like you keep a team passionate when you're building over time?
A few things, and some of this we've talked about already, but I think workers today, again, aren't just looking for a paycheck. They're looking to advance their career. They're looking to have fun at work to some extent. They're looking for things that they're passionate about in terms of going to the office every day or even, working remotely every day. So I think it's finding things that can sort of light their fire. And that's a little bit different for every person. I've had people who love to take a business trip and it's really exciting for them. So if you can figure out ways for them to do that from time to time, that's great. I have other people who maybe have pets or have kids and it's not as easy for them and they prefer not to do that. Well, if there's a way to lighten their load, so maybe someone else who prefers to travel for work can do it, that's great too. And so I think it's looking at things like that. Also, and I've said this before, but always realizing that your best employees will want to continue to grow. And so it's really easy for us to think about our own growth, especially in corporate America, which is where I've worked for a long time. We're always thinking about what's that next position. But you have to remember that the people who work with you are also thinking about how can I grow my career? How can I get that next promotion? Even if it's not a promotion, can I learn something new, take on a new responsibility? If you're doing the same job every day for 10 years, I would hope that I'm working with people who don't want to do that, who want to learn new skills. And so I think making sure they have opportunities to take on new tasks, learn new skills, and if you are hiring for a larger spot at the team, that they know that you're considering them and that there's growth for them within your organization, that will keep them happy and loyal and hopefully prepared to be with your company for a long time.
Yeah. You talk a lot about hiring people with passion. And of course, in the magazine world, that is so big. For a fashion magazine, as you see in The Devil Wears Prada, is like she didn't come in passionate about fashion, but she had to be in order to really excel at her career, similar to an interior design or whatever. Do you feel like passion can be built, or do you really feel that it's something that should be at the foundation of everything?
Well, what I always say is this. If you are passionate about what you do, I think that two things happen. One, you're able to work a lot harder. For me, I love interior design. I love magazine making. If I'm working extra hours, it doesn't bother me. There are mornings I get up and I log on at 7 a.m. because I'm excited for the day. If you are not passionate about it, yeah, you can still work hard. You can still clock your time, but it's not going to be as easy. The other thing, and Kate White, who was a former editor at Cosmopolitan, I think she coined this term in one of her books called not work-life balance, but work-life brilliance. I have seen a lot in the magazine world where you love to run. And so you work at Runner's World magazine and your job is writing about running shoes, writing about, new workouts. Well, guess what? On the weekend, you're probably going to run too. And if you have to think of some story ideas while you're on that run, it's probably going to inform what happens to you the next week at work. And so I do think when possible, you're less concerned about work-life balance if sort of your work and your life can bleed together a little bit. Yeah. I think that's a lot of things with entrepreneurs too, is like you have the opportunity to build any kind of business you want. If you can build a business that is really interesting to you and is either in a field or with a product that you're also passionate about, it's going to be a lot easier for you to work hard in your business and to sell that product. At the end of the day, if the salesperson is passionate about the product too, they are also going to work hard to sell it, and it's going to be a natural fit. So you can teach people to develop a passion about something, but I think it's a little bit of an uphill climb if you also have someone who is innately passionate and can jump in from day one with that passion.
100%. You know the industry so much. You also are oftentimes your customer, which really helps in marketing, in everything. You know who you're speaking to because either you or people you're surrounded with. I say this as business owners, is they'll come to me with a business idea and it's like, do you want to think about this while you dream, while you're in the shower, while you're washing dishes? Is this something you want to think about all hours of the day? And if it's not, it might not be the perfect business for you to start, or, you need that level of like, it should blend with your life a little bit. You should either be your ideal customer or your past self could be your ideal customer because it just allows for it to be easier. Are there people that start boring companies? You hear this a lot is like, oh yeah, we started the boring company because it's easier to grow because nobody wants to do it. Yeah, you totally can do that. But just like a salesperson, they end up being passionate about sales, not necessarily the product in and of itself. You have to find something that you are passionate about.
Yeah, exactly. The people who have boring companies are passionate about entrepreneurism and making money a lot of times. And, it's funny, not many people know this, but when I first left my job to start my own business, I actually dabbled in starting a product-based business and selling on Amazon. And believe it or not, it's a little bit of a cliche now, but it was going to be, and this was 2014, so it was going to be a vitamin C sound business, and I was going to branch into other forms of skincare, and I started working on it and got my first order of product and designed everything and was starting to put it up online. And I realized at a certain point, I love skincare, I love the beauty industry, but I was like, I'm really passionate about designing the packaging and designing the website, and I'm not really that interested in selling this. And that's when it sort of occurred to me like, oh, you're leaving your job to go into business. Why don't you go into a branding business and really help other people do this, where that's what you're focusing on all day and not focusing on like, how am I going to move the product at the end of the day?
I did the same thing. I started a sustainable product business and I scaled it and I had sales coming in. And I realized I actually just liked growing the business. I used the products on my day-to-day, but I didn't want to develop them. I literally just liked the branding, the marketing, and the scaling, and the strategy, and the data. And so I did the same thing. I started working with other businesses to just scale their business. And that's what I'm passionate about. And I think it's really interesting to really look at what is that within you. And you might not know. You might not know until you do it. And then you burn it down and you start something else. And it is what it is. And it's one of those pieces that sometimes you don't know until you're in it. And then you're like, okay, I don't like this. And you can adjust. But once you do it once, it's so much easier to do it a second time.
Exactly. Yeah. The skills you learn being an entrepreneur can apply to all sorts of businesses after that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. So I know you talk a lot about branding, community building, marketing, storytelling, and that is a lot of what we talk about on this podcast. From your business, it takes having a mission. It takes having a message to build a community. And in the magazine world, identity is so linked with how well your magazine is doing. Gosh, I remember being 14, grabbing the Teen Vogue, right? And like there's so much identity in the magazines that you do like. What are some of your major foundations that you feel like brands need in order to be a scalable business overall?
I always say that like pre-social media and pre-internet, magazines were how people built a sense of community, writing in, getting their editor's letter published, reading about what other people were doing who had similar interests, whether that's in the teen magazines or like I had like an aquarium fish hobbyist magazine when I was a kid because I like loved aquariums. Yeah, exactly. There was and is a magazine for everyone. Of course, now, you can also go online to do that. But I do think there are some things that started with the magazine business that are really applicable. One is having someone who can be the face of the business. That's been for years, the editor-in-chief of a magazine is someone who in many ways looks like the reader, is probably the same age or same demographic as the main reader, has the same interests as the reader. If you look at, like Real Simple magazine, Kristen Van Aldertrop, who was the editor there for like 13 years. I interviewed her and have talked to her for the book, but she was raising kids and like a full-time mom and like trying to like not pull her hair out at the end of the day. And that's exactly who her readers were. And they really identified with her. And so a lot of times the problem that your product is solving is maybe a problem you've had before, or you've even come up with this product because it's something that has really helped you out in your life. So I think that having someone who can be the face of the business, because people follow people, on social media posts or, in terms of your communications, they would rather hear from another person than from just a company. That may be you. It may not be you. If there's someone else on your team who's, really gregarious and outgoing and is media savvy and also in the same demographic, it could be that person.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing in terms of knowing your audience and communicating with them is really having someone be the face. And then there's all kinds of other stuff in terms of knowing where they congregate. Are they on certain social media platforms? Are they online? Are they in person at certain types of events? And so on and so forth to really help like sort of build that sense of community.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's all about your audience. It's all about your customer. It's all about how can we say that we are for you, and having a face of a business. And in the world of AI, I think everybody's trying to push to these automated everything. We're only going to crave it more as a society. The more that everything is AI and automated and tech, everyone's going to want faces. And we're seeing that already in marketing.
I think there's also something to be said for producing two different kinds of content. There's one is like content that converts. For a magazine, that's like the cover of the magazine, which is essentially cover lines, and that is meant to sell you on buying the magazine. And that may be some of your posts, maybe even some of your ads that are online or, on Instagram, other social media platforms. But then I think it's also really good to have content that is in the same subject area as what you are selling, but is less meant to sell them on the product and more just meant to sort of build trust and build relationships. So the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine, he's someone that I interviewed for this project. His name's Jason Pfeiffer, and he talks about really there's a lot of magazines who have gone on to sell products or who have sort of figured out in the digital age what their 2.0 version looks like. And for those most successful brands, it's that they are also now maybe selling something different, but using content as a way to sort of build authority and build relationships with their readers and community. So that's why, even like the Nikes of the world and the Fitbits of the world, and Peloton, like all of those companies also have blogs and they have Facebook groups and they have other ways for you to podcasts.
Yeah.
Exactly. Other ways for you to engage that aren't, maybe don't even mention the product a lot of times, but are sort of reminding people, oh yeah, they're an authority in this space and I learned something from them. So maybe I'll hang around and buy something from them too.
Yeah, it's really just to build brand and keeping you top of mind when you're thinking about something. If you spend an hour on, a podcast listening to the Nike, whatever, CEO, all of a sudden you feel much more connected to Nike because you feel like you know this story. And it's way more time than you've spent with any of these other sneaker brands in the last, whatever, couple of months. And so I do think it's so important to see yourself, to have connection, to have that community at the forefront of everything you do.
Lululemon has been great at this, and I'm sure there are lots of other brands that do it too. But At a certain point, if you have repeat customers who are really excited, make them brand ambassadors and let them go out and tell your stories. And you can give them discounts, or, you
Yeah.
can give them free product to test out. I mean, that's amazing. They're getting a free product and you're hearing ahead of time what the problems are with it or what's good and bad about it. I think that's another way to really sort of turn your loyal fans into evangelists for the company as well.
100%. And in the world of micro influencers and everybody creating a platform online, when you find these people that really do love your brand, that they were organically spending that amount of money, it's just like a team. It's an incentive to keep them to A, keep buying, and B, to keep talking about you. It's a great point. Awesome. Well, this was so great, Victor. One last question that we ask every guest is, if there was something on this topic, lead like an editor, that you could scream from the mountaintops that we haven't talked about, something that you think is truly so important to touch on, what would that be for your book, for your philosophies?
I think that one of the things that makes editors good at their jobs, and one of the things that I think is essential, is to be curious. Continually be curious about everything. When an editor gets a piece of copy in, they read it, but they're always asking questions. What else can we, add? Like, oh, this doesn't make 100% sense. Oh, like you said this, what about that? I think that being curious about your business and about your industry and about what's new, everyone is in a relationship with AI now that is very new, and some people love it, some people hate it. For goodness sakes, be curious about it. I think always asking, what can I do or what can I learn that I don't already know? You'll continue to grow as long as you keep asking questions and being curious.
100%. We always say be curious, not critical. Take the emotion out of it. Like we were saying, is it doesn't have to be, you have all this way to go. It's really just let me play with it and poke around. And that is something that you talked a lot about in the book, is curiosity. So I'm glad that you touched on that. Victor, where can people find you? Where can they find your book? Thank you so much for being here. This has been so lovely.
Yeah, so you can go to victormays.com, and that's sort of my whole hub for my author portal, my design work. I've worked in interior design magazine, so all of that creative work is on there as well. And yeah, the book is on Amazon and anywhere else that you buy books.
Awesome. Lead like an editor. Everybody, will put it in the show notes as well. It was a lovely read. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Business Growth Podcast. We put out new episodes every Tuesday and Friday. So if you love this one, make sure that you're subscribed so you never miss a conversation. If you want more conversations with me and other business owners, make sure that you join our completely free podcast community, the Founders Cafe. The link is in the show notes. You can get bonus resources, access to free coaching calls, as well as connect with like-minded business owners like yourself. Make sure that you rate and review the podcast 5 stars, share it with a friend to keep those conversations moving, and come back every Tuesday and Friday. I'll see you there.